Hey.
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Uh,
Hey.
I I'm so happy to talk to you. I don't know if you remembered a couple of years ago I reached out to you
I
because
knew.
Shambhala
Yeah,
exploded. Yeah.
I remember. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So we both have that in common where both of us had our
Hmm.
teachers involved in sexual assault situations, and we both have subsequently. I don't know your whole relationship now, if you're still part of your community or how you've dealt with it, but I left.
Yeah, yeah. I have a whole chapter in Love and Rage about it.
I can't wait to read.
It is an expose that will get me excommunicated. But yeah. Well, let's just say I'm taking a break.
Yeah, I get that. I relate. And it's in both of our charts. I was
Yeah.
so excited to read your chart. I have your chart up and also the chart of the birthday of your book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you and I actually have a lot in common, which makes sense. It's all about rebelling against the guru. It's like we're both very devoted, and yet our path required us rebelling against that devotion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you're a Virgo like me. Our birthdays are 3 days apart. Yeah, and Bernie Sanders is right between us, so
Really?
I feel like I'm in good company.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, but Virgo's all about sacred work. Um,
Yeah.
and so for you and for me and for Bernie, it's like our life is really devoted to our sacred work. And in order to feel joy and to feel vitality and happiness and purpose, we have to be primarily engaging in our sacred work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have the most Virgo chart of anyone I've ever seen.
Uh-oh.
It's like Virgo, 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 Virgo. It's so beautifully Virgo, and I'm pulling this up. And it's all in the 11th house,
Okay.
which is humanitarianism.
Okay. Mhm.
So for you, it's like, how can I serve humanity? And that's the big question
Yeah.
in your chart.
Yeah.
And your north node is right there, and it's conjunct Mercury. So how can I use my voice to serve humanity? So it's beautiful that you wrote this book, and the book is very auspiciously timed, which we'll get into.
Yes.
And you probably already know that without knowing the chart. But
Mhm.
wow, what a powerful moment for this to come out. And and the other thing I'll say about you is your south node's in Pisces. So it's like you came in from the spirit realm, like as a
Yeah.
transcended person to be of service, which makes
Yeah.
perfect sense knowing you.
Yeah. That makes a lot
And
of sense. Hmm.
yeah, but I would love for you to just
Yeah.
introduce yourself and talk about your book a little bit
Yeah.
if you feel inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Lama Rod. This is my book, Love and Rage. I started with the title. Before I had any content, I started with the title because the title came first. When I first started thinking about the book, it was Love and Rage. I have no idea where it came from, you know. But backing back a little bit, this book is really a culmination of my life, and I think for me, I go back even further. I was born in Georgia, North Georgia, Rome, Georgia, and you know that. And I grew up in, of course, the South, the Bible Belt, the Deep South, and I grew up in the Black church, but it's interesting because I wasn't called to be there, right? Because I couldn't quite fit in. I fit into the church culturally, but not religiously or spiritually. A lot of the theology never made sense to me. But what started to make sense was service. Like I just my whole life, I've just been concerned with how to help people. And nothing excited me more than to get involved in a cause or an organizing project or like some type of service project. And that was from my early teens, till now. you know. And, you know, growing up, you know, in high school, like I really was so drawn to like these issues that people had a lot of judgment around, like teen pregnancy was something I worked on in high school. You know, substances, you know, alcoholism, substance abuse, you know, I got into that in high school. In college, you know, I did work around hunger and homelessness, AIDS and HIV, awareness and education, you know, queer and trans issues, you know, and so forth. And that took me directly into activism, you know, in my early 20s. And I joined what was called a Catholic worker community, you know, or a community that was inspired by the Catholic worker. And the Catholic workers are a movement where, really traditionally really devout folks get together, you know, and they're just doing activism, they're doing service, they're doing this really edgy work to liberate people from suffering. And that community here in Boston really it was like for the first time in my life, you know, I found a place where I belonged, you know, within that community where people were dedicating their lives, their whole lives to service. That's where I met the Dharma, that's where I met Buddhism, because a lot of the folks were practicing Buddhists. My mentor, Kathy, was, you know, this example of bringing together both the paths of serious activism and Dharma practice. And that was really the first examples of Dharma that I had. I was really lucky to get that, and that deeply inspired me. And of course, that led me to ask, what else, right? And so I became a practitioner. And you know, all of this is in both Love and Rage and Radical Dharma, which is my first book. And that led me to my monastery, KTC Kagyu Tupjing Shole, where I met my root teacher, Nola Rinpoche, and I went into the 3-year retreat program, and this was 2008.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and so it's always evolution for me. It's always asking, what else can I do? And I feel like finally I'm in this place where everything has come together for me.
Fully.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to make clear I'm a huge fan of you, and you've been such an inspiration to me and to many, many, many people in my life. And this just does feel like your time, your moment to step into the next level, you know, of who you are and what you have to offer. It's just lining up perfectly with this moment in time and what we're ready for, you know. And astrologically, I mean, that's my framework, you know, this is what helps me make sense of the world. But astrologically, this is supposed to be the year we begin a whole new age in humanity.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's funny because for years I was teaching this like all over the world, like 2020, we're beginning a whole new age in humanity. And they're like, how's everything going to change in a year? And I'm like, we'll see.
Exactly. I felt this 2 years ago. You know, I felt like one day, it was just like the apocalypse is coming. You know, and I started teaching about the apocalypse. I was a Dharma teacher talking about the apocalypse. You know,
that's amazing.
You know, and of course I have a chapter on the apocalypse, and you know, but yeah, it's just the shift. Of course, like you, I had no idea. I was like, I don't know how this is going to happen, but something's going to happen.
Totally.
You know,
I mean, totally.
Yeah, you know, and of course we couldn't have ever imagined
this specific thing with like, you know, George Floyd, the Karen in the park. Yeah, we couldn't have imagined the specifics, but it was brewing, you know, and I think a lot of us were feeling it. And I was teaching a lot of young people, and I kept saying, just wait till 2020. Like, hold on. Like, don't get into the drugs. Don't off yourselves yet. Just wait. We have a chance, you know, and that chance is coming in 2020. And I feel it now. It's like miracles are happening in a way.
Yes. That's, you know, and that's the hardest part about this period, is for us to see it as a period of potential. You know, because the work is incredibly hard, you know, and I often say, you know, it's like there are people who won't make it.
Yeah.
You know, and when I say, you know, and like, that doesn't mean that you're going to die. Like, dying doesn't mean that you're not going to make it. Dying just takes you further along a path, you know. But dying, when I say people won't make it, it's that people will not be able to do the work, or they won't choose to do the work to
Yes.
evolve into what's next. I feel like we're in this passage. This is why Tara is so important for me, because Tara means star and she's related to navigating, so I just feel like we're being led. We're in this journey. We're going to another place, but we're in the passage. We're in the journey, and the journey is just tough. It's like journeying on a ship during a storm on the sea,
Mm.
and we're just being tossed, and like we're just like, we're not gonna make it, but like we are gonna make it if we just stay present, keep our
Yeah,
hearts open.
I have chills everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, you are in your chart, like the shaman for
Yeah.
humanity, like you have your ascendant at 0 degrees Scorpio, the zenith of the sign. And
Wow.
Scorpio's all about alchemy and
Yeah.
transmutation. And that's how you begin. That's where you begin. And Uranus is in your first house, which is humanitarianism. So it's like, how can we transmute humanity? And you do that by your very presence, and so I feel it, like you have that quality where you can inspire transmutation and awakening just from people being in your presence, and there's something different about your presence, it's like who you are, your identity, is different. Your identity was, I would say, was
Yeah.
outside of the box, and now it's not outside of the box anymore.
Exactly. That's it. I felt so much like an outsider. Like I've always felt like I was out of time and out of place, for most of my,
Yes.
especially when I decided to do 3-year retreat, people were like, what's wrong with you? But I just knew that I had to do it, and like having just to hold steady with the messages, the visions that I was getting about the world and about my place in it, even when people were just like not getting it.
That's it. I mean, that's it with Uranian and Aquarian types. It's like our role was to be outsiders. Our role was to sort of stand up against the
Yeah,
established
yeah,
norms. And as a result, there's like pain, right? Pain
yeah,
of being an outsider, pain
yeah,
of not belonging,
yeah,
pain of feeling different.
yeah,
But I kept saying, this year, 2020, as we enter the Aquarian age, those of us who've been outsiders for whatever reason, whether because of our points of view, our race, our gender, our gender identity, whatever, it's like suddenly those on the outside are wearing the crowns,
mm, mm-hmm.
and I kept saying, like this new age, it's like ruled by the feminine and ruled by the person of color,
Yes,
like that everyone who's been on the most outside will wear the crown.
yes,
And if you think about it, it makes sense logically, not just astrologically, but
right,
it makes sense logically because, the white man has been in charge up until now, and the white man,
yeah,
and the white man has had to put himself in other people's shoes the least,
yeah, mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
because everything's written from that perspective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Laws and books and movies and culture, like the mainstream culture of the West, at least, and really throughout the world, it's influenced the worldwide culture.
Yeah.
And anyone who's been the most outside of that has had to develop the most empathy, or has the most practice with empathy and the most practice with strength and
Yes.
sort of trusting yourself,
Yeah.
and despite outsider um, opposition, oppression,
Yeah.
or doubt.
It's like what I hear you really like talking to is patriarchy, and the ways in which patriarchy has robbed so many of us of creativity, of flexibility, of fluidity, of the ability to adapt, and the only way we can survive is through adapting, is through flexibility, through expanding, through evolving, through being fluid. And those are like very feminine, like energy qualities. Those are the qualities of the mother, and we have to embody that now, and we have to, rely on those who have trained in that embodiment to actually lead the way.
Yes.
Like, I mean, women of color, right? You know, trans folks of color, you know, gender nonconforming folks of color, people who have traditionally been like shoved out of patriarchy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like the margins, those who are in the margins are coming to the forefront now to set all of us free. You know,
Yes.
but it's just going to be so much pain, though.
So yes, so much pain,
Yeah,
so much pain. Yeah, and
yeah,
I, you know, and I, it's hard, sometimes I get so excited. I am a bit of an optimist, and so I feel like the waves of change. Like I feel so many people awakening that were asleep or resistant before, and my heart just expands, and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening, you know. But I also need to remember that there's a shadow, and there's also there are
yes.
people who are resisting. There are people who aren't going to, as you said, be able to make this transition gracefully or at all.
Mhm.
Uh,
They're going to put up a fight.
they 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 are, but they're losing now. I feel it. They're
Yeah,
losing.
I think we need to hear more of that. We need to hear like that, you know, that there's a that the light will win.
Yes.
You know, because sometimes it's so hard to connect to that. Even for me, you
Yes.
know, but it's harder for me because I'm so I think because of, you know, as you see in the chart, is because I'm so acclimated to struggle, you know, that it's like, I'm just here to struggle. I'm just here to work,
Yes. Oh,
you know?
I relate. I'm like, bring it on. We are to
Yeah.
work really hard. Let's do
Yeah.
this thing, you know?
The
And
harder, the better, you
yeah, and
know?
the more chaotic the better. That's
Yeah.
both of us. We have both.
Yeah.
We're like willing to work really hard, and we're both comfortable in
Yeah.
chaos. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, but you have it major. I mean, to have Uranus in Scorpio in your first house, you're like, let's dive into the chaos and transmute this into wisdom, transmute this into enlightened society,
Yeah.
you know? And that's, I mean, Aquarius, I always say the age we're moving into, and the ruler is Uranus in your first chart. It's the ruler of the 11th house, where you have like 7 planets and points. You know, it's Aquarius is the pinnacle of human potential. We can't go to Pisces, which is transcendence, until we've mastered Aquarius, which is the respect of each individual being, you
Yes.
know, and individual liberation and individual direct connection to the divine without steep patriarchal intervention, you know. And so that's the phase, the next 2000 plus year phase we're moving into now is the Aquarian age.
Yeah.
You know, and so we can't spiritually bypass, and that's another big lesson of moving into the Aquarian age, is we can't just go to peace and pacifism and love and light.
Yeah.
You know, we have to
Yeah.
work with the emotional and the
Yeah.
human, which is
Yeah.
what your book is all about. And you prepped me and so many of us for this moment, you know,
Yeah.
by the way you've spoken about anger,
Yeah.
and the way that you've honored anger.
Yeah. And it was my guides, it was my ancestors, you know. I mean, I Leah Tiaxon, who's my primary spiritual guide and advisor in Atlanta, like we've been working together over the course of this book, you know, really like channeling, you know, because when I started writing the book, I would just shut down, you know, and we would just work together, just going through practices, like really working with these energies, because so much had to be written. You know, this book, like this is only half of the manuscript that I submitted.
Wow.
You know, and so my publisher was like, we can publish a 500, 600 page book, you know, but do we want to? You know?
Probably not.
I had forgot, I literally got so in the process of connecting to these messages that I'd forgotten, like I had written twice the length of the manuscript that, you know, I was asked to write, because everything had to come through, you know. And
Yeah,
at the time it was just like, I don't know why I'm writing this, like this
that's
doesn't, like,
beautiful.
I didn't really get the book, you know.
That's so interesting,
Yeah, I didn't get it. I
because
was
you were
like,
channeling.
yeah, I was channeling everything, and we got everything together, and I was, you know, flipping through it, and I was like, I don't know if this makes sense, you know, because it feels so unfinished.
Mm.
You know, it feels like the edges are real. It's like, you know, when you're hemming clothes or you're making clothes, you know, and you leave the hems, the edges unfinished. That's how
Mhm.
I feel about the book in a way, you know. And I feel like maybe it's something that you grow into.
Mm.
You have to have the ability to let out. You know, once you start growing into something, you have to let those seams loose a little bit. And maybe this is what this book is doing. But I knew what the thing that I knew really and very directly was that no, we have to like have this holistic view of anger because anger is the driving energy right now. And if we don't develop agency over it, then it's going to drive us over the edge.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. And
that's
you know, I you really like opened my eyes to that. I've read Audre Lorde now and like
yeah.
a kind of
Hmm.
but you introduced me to this whole notion of anger, and which I think as a Buddhist, you
Yeah.
know, I was trained to really be neutral, be
Hmm.
neutral, be neutral, be neutral, be neutral, you know, and which led to my being abused in my
Yeah.
Buddhist community and all these other women being abused
Yes.
in my community,
Yes.
you know, and that neutrality and that neutral stance really kept, you know, women and POC oppressed, and
Yeah.
not just in my Buddhist community, but in the larger world, you know. And I started realizing that it was okay to be angry, and that's where boundaries came from. It was okay to be messy, it was okay to stand up, it was okay to make white men uncomfortable, you know.
Yeah.
And then, and once that started happening, then my friends who were, you know, spiritual activists working in racial justice were like, come over here.
Yeah.
You know, like, you
Exactly.
can't really address feminism until you address race.
Right.
And that started
Right.
my path on, you know, looking into race and whiteness, and doing my work of feeling the profound discomfort
Yeah.
of whiteness, the burning freaking waves of whiteness
Yeah.
and white fragility.
And sitting with that discomfort, you know, you
It's
know,
no joke, but
no,
it's liberating.
it's liberating. I, I mean, all I do is sit with discomfort. You know, all I do is sit with heartbrokenness. Like this is really this all my practice is. Actually, it's holding all of
Mm.
that, the brokenheartedness, you know, and not getting lost in it, you know, but just holding it, but learning to love it.
Yes, I
Yeah.
love that.
That's
Yeah.
such a hard, I know that's such a complex, nuanced teaching. You know, people get really weird when I say that, you know, but when I say love, it's like you have to accept it.
Mm.
Like you have to, this isn't, my heartbreak isn't just something that like it's an inconvenience. It is there teaching me something about how to stay connected to myself and how to stay connected to the world and to people and to the land and to the plants, you know, and I totally resonate with you being in a spiritual community where you're like always told to, okay, bypass the anger, you know, and beginning to realize that the anger was actually, or my disconnection from the anger was actually putting me in a really unsafe situation, you know.
Yes.
And now, of course, I'm not survived abuse, you know, from my spiritual community, but like I was a part of
Yes.
the system that
Yeah.
maintained abuse because I chose not to look deeper.
Yeah. I mean, same.
Yeah,
I was abused and I became part of the abuse, and it was like a dad wound. I think part of
yeah,
patriarchy is we all have dad wounds, you know.
yeah,
It's like one giant collective dad wound, you know.
yeah,
And I'm like, so accept me, let me be part of this, like, don't, you know, don't reject me, daddy, you know. And then trying to play to this abusive patriarchal system and uphold these values that didn't actually resonate with my deeper heart, you know, because I believe daddy knew better than I did.
yes. And who was I, right? Who was I to like have an opinion, you know, that was somehow better than this enlightened master that I had taken as a teacher? Like, who was I? You know, the way you feel really disenfranchised, in that system where it's like you can't possibly know what's good for you. you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And,
I don't know. And that, I mean, that's deep patriarchal hierarchy. And that it goes back to like, you know, all, I mean, it wasn't just Catholicism, it was Buddhism too. And, you know, it was like, do not directly connect to the divine.
yeah.
You must connect through this steep patriarchal hierarchy. Otherwise, we will burn you alive
Yeah,
and stone
exactly.
you, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
and
yeah,
and it was like sexuality was shamed, which was a direct connection to the divine. Energy
yeah,
healing, the feminine and intuitive arts, you know, like doulas were killed,
yeah,
astrologers and healers were killed, women who were just widows and spinsters and dependent women were killed, you know. And it was all the propaganda of, you cannot directly connect to the divine, you must connect through us and give us your power and your money, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I mean, it's what I see now, in terms of patriarchy, but specifically is what I see now with so many trans women being killed, all over the world, but, really definitely here in this country, particularly the ways in which men, um, the ways in which, how should I, it's, not the words, the ways in which men that we've been conditioned not to hold the depths of our own hearts, and to see ourselves reflected in the world around us, and
Yeah.
we're not able to space for that. And that becomes our reactivity to that insecurity becomes an act of violence against other folks and against ourselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, let me get my dog to
Yeah,
stop barking.
absolutely.
Lottie, come here. Okay. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, well, Lottie, come here. Oh. All right. Well, there are things I want to say about your chart and about the book's chart that are so relevant to everything we've been talking about. And one that's really interesting, just because I'm still looking at your chart, is that you have your moon at 0 degrees Aries, the zenith of the sign. And your moon is like your deeper emotional self, your deeper essence. And Aries is anger. You know, Aries is rage. Aries is identity. And it's not forming any angles to any other planet. So it's like you have to do so much work to sort of integrate that and to honor that, honor your rage, honor your identity, and like integrate it into the rest of your being and into the rest of your chart. And it's like, luckily you're Virgo, so you're like, I'm not afraid of the work, and so this is the kind of chart where you really could go all the way. It's like you had to do extra work, but you really could go all the way. Virgo gets a bad rap, but I'm biased. I love Virgo. I'm a Virgo. I'm a Virgo. But you know what? We don't give up on ourselves. We don't give up on anyone else. We never give up. Virgo's connected to the goddess Estrella, who was the last god or goddess to give up on humanity at the beginning of the Bronze Age, when humans became depraved. Everybody left but Estrella. And Estrella was like, I don't want to give up. And finally she left, but she vowed to return to bring in the new golden age, which is beginning this year.
Wow.
And you're a Virgo.
I've got to write that down. I haven't heard that before. Wow.
Yeah. The goddess Estrella. It's in my book, actually. I wrote about it in my Virgo section in my book.
Wow.
Yes.
That's so beautiful. Like she never gave up, but
reluctantly she finally had to, but then she was like, I will only give up if I can return to help bring in the golden age.
Which is like, it's wisdom. There's a wisdom there. I can't do the work now, but I promise to come back and complete the work.
Yes. So it wasn't giving up forever. It was like, there's wisdom in stepping back right now, because y'all just got to go through your shit. I don't need to be part of this. You're not listening to me anyway, so there's no point in me staying here, And now it's so interesting that the golden age is beginning, and now people are listening,
Mhm.
you know. And what's also fascinating about the birth of your book is that this is so cool, but it came out right when the sun was getting ready to cross the North Node. So the sun and the North Node were conjunct in Gemini. And we've already hit some keywords for Gemini, but adaptability, and listening, you know. And also it's just a book, it's your voice, you know. It's like you're putting this book out into the world, and we've just entered a 1.5 year period of educating ourselves, reading more, listening more, dialoguing more, you know. The wisdom is in listening, letting go of our rigid beliefs and our dogma and the indoctrination of patriarchy and white supremacy, you know, and opening into this like open-minded, inquisitive, and curious investigation of who we are, how we're showing up individually and collectively. And as your book comes out, the North Node is our highest evolutionary potential. The essence of this book is helping to lead us to our highest evolutionary potential, you know. And there's this incredible timing, you know, when the sun is conjunct in the North Node, it's this incredible good fortune and incredibly good timing that indicates as well. So your book, that's why I started by saying your book is incredibly well timed. It's not just because it's obvious, you know, looking around, it's also in the chart.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think anyone could argue with the fact that your book is incredibly well timed. And if you were channeling also, it could have been like you were writing for this moment, and it may not have even made sense at that moment.
That's it. I think that's exactly it. I was writing for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. That's North. I mean, and that's who you are. You are a channeler. You are writing for the future. You are a person of the future, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. Anyway, in many ways, you've been too far ahead of your time, you know,
Yeah.
until now.
Oh no. I need a new gimmick now.
Yeah, now you get to sit in the crown and get used to being popular, you know, which is a journey in and of itself.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like your identity has been an outsider, so in a way you're like, you have to get used to being popular.
Exactly. I have to get used to being normal in a way, you know, and that's what I've been sitting with really during this quarantine. It's like, oh, like I'm coming down to earth for the first time. Like I've been up in the air, you know. Um, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like that resonates so much.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm excited. Like my moon's Aquarius, and so I'm like totally Aquarian. I've always been like, I grew up in Texas, in Dallas, and I was always like the little girl at the dinner table fighting with her entire family. I always joke that I was a born liberal and a family of conservatives. You know, I was like one of 3 kids in the Amnesty International Club in high school, and I stood up on a lunchroom chair in front of everybody with a microphone, and I stood up against capital punishment, and I got booed out of the lunchroom, like violently booed out of the lunchroom. And in some ways I'm comfortable with that. In some ways I'm like comfortable being the outsider, you know. But there is something exciting, both exciting and a little bit unfamiliar, you know, about this shift where the Aquarian types are suddenly being heard, and it's not so abnormal to be defiant and rebellious, you know, and it's even celebrated. But anyway, that's me. But going back to you and your book, like what's the other beautiful, auspicious thing, and you're clearly magical, and I didn't need to look at your chart to know that, but this is totally magical timing for your book. But the other thing that's auspicious is that Mars, on the day, you know, the moment your book was born, Mars was at 22 degrees Pisces. Mars is anger. 22 is the master teacher number. And it was in Pisces, love, the highest form of transcendent love, and conjunct Neptune, which is also transcendent love, the ruler of Pisces. So love and rage coming together to be the master teacher. And it's in the first house.
That's incredible.
Isn't that incredible? And the ascendant is Aquarius. So it's like it has this ability to infiltrate the collective unconscious and to affect humanity and to help
Wow.
bring in enlightened society. And the other beauty of the chart is that Pluto and Jupiter are conjunct now. Saturn's at 0 degrees Aquarius, and they're all in the 12th house, which is spirituality and spiritual work. And Pluto and Jupiter in Capricorn, patriarchy. Pluto is death and rebirth and transmutation. Jupiter is belief systems and opening our minds and expanding our horizons, right? And it's also teaching, right?
Yeah.
And then the 12th house is just a little bit, it's at the end of Capricorn and mostly Aquarius. So it's like it's helping to sort of root out the last bit of patriarchy, you know, like root out the last bit of that kind of patriarchal conditioning, and then move into building enlightened society, which is Saturn at 0, the zenith. We keep talking about it because it keeps showing up. That's 0, the zenith of Aquarius.
I just realized my mother is in the room as well. So hello to my mom.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah, my mom, Wendy. My mother is a minister.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, she's a Methodist minister.
So it runs in your family.
Yes, yes. My grandfather, my father's father, was a minister.
Wow.
As well. And my mother's a minister.
A female minister. That's beautiful.
Yes. She's saying hello, sweetheart.
Oh.
There was another question that I noticed. Did I plan the drop date, the publication date? I want to clear that up because this was a mistake. Like the book was supposed to be out in October, and I couldn't meet a deadline to save my life. Like if my life was being threatened, I still would not have met the deadlines. I've missed, I think, 3 deadlines. We had to keep pushing the book back further and further and further. Like it was October, then they were like, no, let's do it in January. You know, then it just kept moving back, and finally they were like, we have to do it in June, or we have to wait. You know, and I just kind of really, really pushed to get the book done. But I was on the schedule of whatever I was channeling.
Yes, you know? That's it. Yes,
that's
it. When we're working with the Dralas, we're on their schedule.
Exactly.
The blocks are intentional, you know.
I felt so bad. You know, I felt so bad. Like I felt like I was disappointing everyone. You know, my publisher, but like I just couldn't. The book came when it came. You know, and so I did. So to answer that question, no, like we had no idea like what was going to be happening this year. Like again, like we had no idea.
Yeah, how could you? I know it's crazy, and you know it's funny because that same thing happened with my book where it came out when it came out. I really had no say in it, and I wrote all these things that ended up being like prescient, you know, it ended up telling the future. I wrote like Pluto and Scorpio generation, i.e. the millennials, they're the revolutionaries, you know, and they're here to bring in a whole new age in humanity set to begin in 2020. And they're here to confront power and oppression. And I wrote that that came out in 2018. And now a video of my book just went viral because someone found these sections that were telling the future. You know, I don't know where that came from. I was just channeling, just like you.
That's it. That's it. And I'm always channeling. Like that's how I move through the world now. It's just by being in this kind of like connection, you know, with beings around me, you know, and it's been really beautiful to develop those connections.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. The way I see it, especially with you, is so much Uranus influence. It's like, we're almost channeling from the collective higher self, you know, or the collective wisdom is channeling through us, blended with the Dralas and, you know, the connection to the divine and our own wisdom, you know. But it's like if anyone can do it, you know, you can tune in and get still, and anyone can kind of tune into another individual's higher self or the collective wisdom, you know. But there are messages I've found that just want to come through. that we don't even know. I, as a channeler, like sometimes I don't even know what it means until after I've released it, you know. Um, so anyway, I think it's so beautiful. I mean, and of course, like Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn are all forming conjunctions this year, which hasn't in Capricorn, which hasn't happened for 6,500 years. And 6,500 years ago, when that happened, the north nodes of all these planets was in Capricorn as well, which is patriarchy. And so that was the beginning of patriarchy. And that was actually when the Macedonian lightning god worshiping culture took over, you know, the fertility goddess worshiping culture, you know, and then patriarchy took root at that moment. And now this year, when these three planets are conjoining, the north nodes are in Cancer, which is matriarchy. And so astrologers for decades have been predicting that 2020 would be the year we end patriarchy and begin matriarchy. Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And your book came out right at this key moment, you know, when Pluto and Jupiter are conjunct and we're really doing the work to uproot these oppressive belief systems. And when we're beginning to build, you know, the new, we're beginning to build the next version of humanity. That's Saturn at 0 Aquarius. But there's a quality, and I haven't gotten, my book hasn't arrived yet, but there's a quality, and I don't know if this is true in your book, but there might be a quality of like, what do we need to look at? Like, what do we need to look back towards so we can move forward?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say that's quality in the book. You know,
or like, what do we need to still like redo? Like, what do we need to look at? What do we need to sit with that's left over from this patriarchal residue so we can build the future paradigm? You know. And it's also giving the tools, like, here are your tools for building the future paradigm. I mean, I haven't read it yet, but that's my guess. But based on the quotes I've read. And the other beautiful thing is Mercury's in Cancer and it's opposite Pluto. So I imagine there's storytelling. It sounds like you're telling stories that are powerful. And in opposite Pluto, the stories have this like transmutational quality, you know, and this extra power that is connected to, like, here I'm telling these stories, and these stories will help us to sort of liberate from whatever beliefs or internal stuckness we need to liberate from.
Yeah, the storytelling is really important for me, and that's how I work through the teachings and the messages. It's just working through the stories of my life. You know?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, this book has a really strong storytelling essence, according to its chart. And then the moon of the book, just like you, is in Aries, which is again anger, you know, looking at anger and looking at identity. So that also makes sense. But there's this objective look at anger in a way, this investigation, this I mean, objective might be the wrong word, but with Gemini, it's this sort of, how can we use our minds to investigate our emotions, you know?
Right.
And Aries is also in the emotions that live in the body. So Gemini is using our minds to investigate what's living in our Aries body, you know? So that feels right on track. But the biggest thing I think is like Mars in Neptune and then the sun on the North Node. I mean, those are like, it couldn't be more perfect.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all very auspicious and well timed. And do you have questions though about the chart of the book or your chart?
Yeah. I guess I wonder, what's next? Does the chart, like, what does it say about what's next? Like, what should I do now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because
Well,
sometimes I feel like I've gotten someplace, and
mhm.
now I'm like, I feel this is particularly what's happening. I'm waiting for something, you know, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, I know that feeling too. I know that feeling too. And I think I felt that in January. I was like, I can't plan anything. Something's coming, you know, and it's gonna throw, there's nothing I can plan right now, you know. And I think that in a way that's what's it's continuing to have. There are more explosions coming, you know, there's more, we're not done.
Yes. Oh, I know that.
This whole year, you know, there are going to be more and more
Yeah.
explosions, um, and it's not really until December of this year that we start saying, okay, it's time to really build the next thing. And really, next year we're starting to build the next iteration of humanity. And still, we're like exploding the old right now. And the voices with Saturn in Aquarius, the beginning of that journey of building the new we've had glimpses of it now. It's like, okay, egalitarianism, okay, there's no pollution in LA,
Yeah.
you know, okay, like female leaders are, you know, rising to the top across the world,
Yeah.
you know, so we're having glimpses
Yes.
of that future, but we're not fully inhabiting yet, we're not fully building it yet. And in December, Saturn and Jupiter will conjoin at 0 Aquarius, you know, and this is a real ignition moment. Okay, it's time to build, you know, it's utopia. I mean, I want to use the word utopia. It sounds hyperbolic, but
Right.
it feels more possible than ever, you know. Uranus is in Taurus. We might have changes in food and farming that are inevitable, and definitely environmentalism and getting off of fossil fuels
Yeah.
within the decade. And then we also have big changes in the allocation of resources and finances, so reparations and also like universal basic income and undoing the 1%, taxing the rich, you know, things like that are on the horizon. But it's like there's so much that's changing so quickly, and we're going to be continuing, you know, these to have these explosions and these big changes, and we're going to have to deal with the people who are
Yeah.
resisting the resistance,
Yeah.
basically.
Yes.
Uh,
That's what I'm worried about.
yeah,
Well,
understandably.
yeah. Because it feels like a backlash. Like there's a Me Too backlash. There's like all these backlashes. And yeah, I definitely feel as if, yeah, it's almost as if it's like the dying breath.
Yes, the
You know,
last gasp.
the last gap, you know, and about I like sometimes I have doubts about that, but I really want to believe that.
Yeah,
You
I mean it is. I mean astrologically, I mean I feel very confident that it is, which may seem like Pollyanna-ish, but I do like strongly believe that we are moving into egalitarianism. That doesn't mean there's not going to be more death. That
yeah,
doesn't mean there's not going to be more horror, you
yeah,
know. But ultimately, we are meant to be moving into way more of a utopian age. We have 2,000 years to figure it out, but we're off to a good start. But for you personally, what's interesting is Uranus, you're about to have your midlife crisis.
what?
Yeah.
I thought I had passed that already.
No. But I think yours is going to be really freaking interesting, like household name kind of stuff, you know? Like, because you know who else has Uranus in the first house is Barack Obama. Um, but yeah, there's this quality of, you know, you being able to infiltrate the collective unconscious, you being able to sort of, you're suddenly everywhere, you're suddenly ubiquitous, you're suddenly, kind of, you have a strong social media presence, for example, and it's opposite your Uranus and Scorpio in the first house, which is you being seen, you know,
Yeah.
your physical presence being seen. Uranus is technology, it can be social media, it's definitely affecting the collective unconscious, and it's having your finger on the pulse, you know, which I think in a way you've always been sort of ahead of your time, and now this is the moment, as we've said, of you really having your freaking finger on the pulse, you know, and having the message that we need collectively, and this way that's really well timed. So as you get closer and closer to this exact opposition, I think it's just you're ready to kind of blow up, and speed up in that process of being seen, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest things that's happening in your chart. And the other big thing is that Uranus, as you get blown up and have your, it's a midlife crisis, but I don't think yours is going to be bad. It might just be this push to get bigger and bigger, and it's like an awakening of sorts. And it's like, I call it restless leg syndrome, where it's like, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And and it's going to be trining, which is a harmonious angle, your whole stellium in Virgo. So you're really supported by this, and you're just ready to get to the next level on every, in every part of your chart. You're next leveling. When Uranus started hitting my chart, I have a stellium in Libra just before, and that happened, I don't know, several years ago. But I went from having a 9-to-5 office job and making like $35,000 a year, and like in a cubicle, to suddenly, like, I started my astrology business and my book, I got a book deal. It like all happened really fast, and that's Uranus. It's what I call instant liberation, and so things speed up. Like Uranus doesn't care about time. Uranus is out of bound. It's like out of the range of the planets that we can see visibly with our eyes. And Saturn, which rules patriarchy, is the last visible planet, but it's also the gatekeeper. It's also discipline. And so we have to master discipline before we go into the esoteric. But once you go into the esoteric, there's no space or time constraints, Right. And that's what I tried to tell people who were linear thinkers, who are like, how are we going to change so quickly, so fast? And I'm like, well, we're not going to be thinking linearly anymore. And when we're thinking multidimensionally, anything is possible. It's like when you meet a wall and you're like, let me pull out my little tool, like Shawshank Redemption, and slowly make a hole and then crawl out through the gutter like 10 years later. That's linear problem solving. But Uranian, Aquarian, multidimensional problem solving there is no wall.
And I absolutely, and I also feel as if we talk about this linear, this relationship to linear time and everything, but I also feel like this is an age where we're returning back to an indigenous worldview instead of a capitalist, patriarchal, materialistic worldview. And like for me, indigeneity means that like we're beginning to rediscover the world as a collective of energies and beings and spirits, and these realms are coming together, and we'll have to like actually expand into reconnecting.
Yes.
So,
yes, and on a human level, because the oneness isn't possible without this Uranian Aquarian human connection.
And it's all coming through the body. Like it's just like we have to come back to the body now, because patriarchy took us out of the body, but when we come back to the body, we have to actually negotiate all the trauma that's accumulated in the body.
Do you want to say more about the trauma?
I just feel like it has required intense disembodiment for us to buy into the systems of power and violence that we've been buying into, like whiteness, like patriarchy, like ableism, many systems like that, including capitalism. And to return back to the body means that like we actually have to slow down. We're reconnecting to the earth, and we have to metabolize the pain. That's why I say that there are people who won't be able to mate, because they won't be able to like negotiate and metabolize the pain that we've accumulated, that we have habitually been bypassing and avoiding, so we can go faster and faster and have more stuff, and I'm really feeling that slowing down. This age is about, it feels like we're breaking really suddenly, You know, it's like being in a car and you like brake really suddenly, like everything like pushes forward, like it jumps forward. That's how I feel. Like it's a jolt, you know, and then that jolt, that rebound is me jumping back into the body. I'm like, oh my God, you know, what was happening? Why was this car going 100 miles an hour? You know, like, why was I going so fast?
Yeah.
You know, and then you come back and then you begin to see the world as it is through the body, through the earth. And that can be heartbreaking because you're like, oh my God, this isn't like I've never seen this before. Why am I just seeing this?
Mm.
You know?
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, one of your gifts I've noticed is that you can teach anyone. You
Mm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can teach all of us. There's no, you're not like you specialize in teaching this demographic or this demographic. You know, you really can teach all of us and all of us powerfully, you know? And I really appreciate that about you. I mean, I really am like truly honored to have this conversation with you and like honored to be in your presence and feel your zappy quality of Uranus to Scorpio, you know, that can just awaken us by honoring us with your body and your presence. And you know, I'm just thank you for all the Virgo and hard work you've done and all the service you've offered. And you know, thank you. Like it's profound, like what you've done within yourself and what you can now offer to the world. And I know that our inner work is so lonely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm back.
I didn't know we would get caught up at exactly an hour.
Oh
Um,
no, that sucks. But we're back. We're back.
I was just gushing and
Yeah.
profusely thank you, but I want to just finish that thought. Right?
Okay.
I just know that it's like hard to be a human in general, you know, but then to for you to be, you know, in your body, who you are, in your identity, and do the hard work that you've done just as a human in general, but also in with the experience you've had, it's profound who you are and what the work you've done and how much it shows. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm basking in your presence. I'm honored that you're here. And I feel like a lot of people feel that way, that you just exist and that you're offering your voice and your teachings and your work to the world. And now your book, Love and Rage, which I'm so excited to read. And it quickly before we go, do you have a favorite quote or a favorite passage you want to read?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's probably not even like something that I've written as a quote. I want to read actually the passage from James Baldwin that I include at the beginning of the book because that's so, for me, it embodies the discussion that we just had, you know? And just to say that, like, yeah, I just want to, like, offer my appreciation to you for this incredible reading, for your incredible work.
Aw.
Well, like, I really appreciate it. And, like, and for, you know, I just depend on the kindness of people, you know, and I just feel like I'm not special, you
Uh,
know.
okay.
I
Yes.
mean, you know, like at like because every day is just the work, you know. It's the like as you know you were just saying, it's the loneliness of the path. It's the loneliness of all these years of being so outside of everything, and then all of a sudden like you become like you get invited back into this new space, and like people are listening to you and paying attention to you, and like when all you've been doing is arguing with people you know, about like, yeah, this is, I see this, you know, and people are like, oh, whatever, you know, what do you know?
Yes.
You know?
Nice. And then they're like dismissive or mad at you or call you crazy. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. So
yeah.
I'm just kind of used to that. You know, I think that's why have so many doubts around the book. I've had so many doubts the past few days about, I mean, is
Oh,
this really like that good, that interesting? Will it actually help? Because I'm just so used to being like ignored in
yeah.
so many different ways, you know? But yeah, just like, yeah, it's just the work. It's just the work. I just kind of get up and I work, you know, and I'm just trying to be present in my body. I'm trying to hold space for the world and trying to make sense of stuff. And I don't think about anything else. You know, I don't get wrapped up in like what people say about me because I feel as if I can't, as Tyra Banks used to say, you can't not to rest on pretty. You know, like I don't feel like I have that ability. I just can't rest on what people say that I am because there's still so much of the work that has to be done every day.
Yes, I totally know what you mean. And that's Virgo. You're
Yeah,
Virgo.
Virgo.
And
Yeah.
that too. I see it in Bernie too. It's just like constantly.
Yeah, it's just work. It's just work. It's like I can't. It's not like this thing that kind of like I float on and just like, oh, I'm so great. I'm so wonderful.
No, Virgo is the humble servant, you
Yeah.
know, constantly working. And you know what's interesting? I used to live with my friend's, my ex-boyfriend's mother, and
Yeah.
she was like Hollywood actress, and she used to make me watch movies with her, and her favorite was the red shoes. And she would pause it at this one scene and make me watch the scene over and over again. And the scene was that this ballerina who was the understudy gets really famous over, and then the next scene cuts to her back in the studio practicing. And she was like, this is the lesson. You've
Mm,
got to keep going, but you never get caught up in any successes. You
yeah.
go back to the studio and practice.
That's it. Always coming back to the cushion. Always.
Always.
Always. Yeah. Um, so I'll read this passage because this passage actually encompasses everything we've been talking about. So this is James Baldwin. I take a big chunk of this. This is from his dialogue with Nikki Giovanni. I think in the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s. So here's the quote, the passage. The very first thing a writer has to face is that he cannot be told what to write. You know, nobody asked me to be a writer. I chose it. Well, since I'm a man, I have to assume that I chose it. Perhaps, in fact, I didn't choose it. But in any case, the one thing you have to do is try to tell the truth. And what everyone overlooks is that in order to do it, when the book comes out, it may hurt you. But in order for me to do it, it had to hurt me first. I can only tell you about yourself as much as I can face about myself. And this has happened to everyone who's trying to live. You go through life for a long time thinking, no one has ever suffered the way I've suffered. My God, my God. And then you realize, you read something or you hear something, and you realize that your suffering does not isolate you. Your suffering is your bridge. Many people have suffered before you. Many people are suffering around you and always will. And all you can do is bring, hopefully, a little light into that suffering. Enough light so that the person who is suffering can begin to comprehend his suffering and begin to live with it and begin to change it, change the situation. We don't change anything. All we can do is invest people with the morale to change it for themselves.
Mm.
You know? And that's really like, that's all I feel like I'm doing. You know, it's just like I'm trying to bring a little bit of light to the world. And if you have to work to get what I'm understanding, or if it impacts you in a certain way, you have to understand that it hurt me first. Like it's come out of the work that I've had to do. I don't teach people anything that I haven't done for myself. You know, when I say hold the pain, hold the heartbreak, go into the heartbreak, I say that because that's what I do. You know, and I've done it and I will continue to do it.
Totally.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, thank you for slaying hearts.
Yeah. I so needed this. Thank you. This is so incredible. You know.
Well, lots of love, and I know, yeah, just sending all the blessings to your book and to you and your work, and you don't need them, but buddy.
No, I think I need some.
Yeah, and is there anything else you want to promote or tell people about before we say goodbye?
No, no. Besides so Juneteenth is on Friday. And please, join us. My Sangha, Bhumi Sparsha, we're joining up with the Kashi Ashram in Atlanta, Georgia. We're doing a whole day of virtual events led by Black teachers, all day, concluding in a panel on Black liberation. So you can go to bhumisparsha.org, or you can go to kashiatlanta.org for more information, and everything's free, it's online.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, take really good care. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay, lots of love to you and everybody. Bye.
Bye.